I'd like to welcome everyone at chess.com to another wacky, crazy, sacrificial, interesting opening from the depths of I don't know where this is from depths of the jungle. I'm going to show you the Hillbilly Attack. And this opening is a really dangerous way to play against the Karakan opening. Now, I would not be surprised if anyone watching this video has never heard of the Hillbilly Attack, if they've never encountered the Hillbilly Attack, if they have no idea what this opening is, because it really is not a well-known opening. It's a secret opening. And I think it's a devastating way to play against the Karakan. Now, I decided to pick this video and two other short and snappy videos with e4 to play against various setups from black, because they kind of go with my King's Gambit videos, which I've also done for chess.com. And you can look at these videos in the archive, and that will give you a repertoire, a way to play after e4 against e5. But now, relying on the move e4, you can obviously face a number of other options. So I'm going to pick some very interesting and super aggressive gambit ways of playing with white against some of black's most common setups. So I'm trying to give you a very interesting and aggressive repertoire for white that will shock black in a number of instances. Now, let me tell you just a little bit of history about the Hillbilly Attack. I first saw this mentioned, I think, in a rather obscure magazine when I was over in Norway, Oslo, playing a tournament, probably about 12 years ago now, something like that. And it was called the Hillbilly Attack. And then I went on to play this in a 5-minute game against a friend of mine. And we had an observer at this game. And this observer, who was a very young boy at the time, came over and he said in kind of broken English, "What on earth was that opening?" And I said, "It's the Hillbilly. Do you not know what the Hillbilly is?" And this young Norwegian kid said, "What is a Hillbilly?" And well, I actually looked up the dictionary definition. I think it kind of is appropriate. So before we go on, I'll give you a quick definition from the Oxford Dictionary of English. And in short, a hillbilly is a free and untrampled white citizen of Alabama who lives in the hills, has no means to speak of, dresses as he can, talks as he pleases, drinks whiskey when he gets it, and fires off his revolver as fancy takes him. So there you go. That is apparently what a hillbilly is. And this opening kind of is a little bit crazy like that. It's a gung-ho opening. So let's have a look at the moves. Well, it starts with e4 and now c6. So this is the Karakan opening. And of course, there are a number of ways that white can play against c6. But the Hillbilly Attack and the opening I'm going to recommend you play now goes with bishop to c4. Now, on first glance of this move, you might be thinking, what on earth is this craziness? This just invites black to play d5, a move that he wants to play anyway in the Karakan to gain an advantage, surely, and he's just going to gain a tempo. Well, the idea of the Hillbilly is that now you drop back the bishop to b3. By the way, if you're wondering who that young Norwegian kid was watching the game, I should probably let you know that it was none other than Magnus Carlsen. And Magnus Carlsen, as a kid, was quite impressed by the Hillbilly. I think he was maybe more shocked by it than impressed. But if it impresses and shocks Magnus Carlsen, then I'm sure it can do the same to your opponents. And okay, after bishop to b3, I'm going to show you the main line of the Hillbilly first, and then we're going to have a look at other options. So I would consider the main line in this position to be d takes e4, and this accepts the pawn sacrifice. And the only way to refute a sacrifice is by accepting it, and d takes e4 is obviously the critical try. Now, one of the great things with the Hillbilly, once this move's been done, d takes e4, you can see the power of the bishop on b3. So after d takes e4, the main move, the power of this bishop on b3 coming across to the f7 square is a very, very strong piece. And normally in the Karakan, you don't get the same position with white to move. And white can take advantage of this by immediately putting pressure on the f7 square. So what is the most aggressive move here? And with the hillbilly, you play the most aggressive move every single time, like a gung trouting, gung throwing, blasting hillbilly. So queen to h5 is the correct move to play. And I love this approach straight towards black's king. And the obvious threat is queen takes s7. So a bit like the beginner's scholar's mate trick. Now, black has two ways to stop this. I would consider g6 to be the main move because it stops checkmate and it gains a tempo. Now, e6 can also be played here, but after e6, you can regain your pawn on e4 quite easily. For example, with the move knight to c3, and after something like knight to f6, the queen comes to h4. And this is a key thing to remember in the hillbilly. The queen, the white queen, will come to h5, as we've seen, but then it will drop back to h4 in nearly all variations. So this is maybe key point number one. Your queen, if given a chance, comes to h5, then comes to h4. So remember that idea. And for example, now you get a very pleasant position, resembling a Caro-Kann after knight d7, knight takes e4, and something along the lines of, these captures happen in the center. If black tries to get rid of the hillbilly bishop on b3, the best square for the queen is actually e3 here. And after knight takes b3, we take with the a pawn, and we have pressure against a7 with the rook. We are also now ready to continue with d4, knight to f3, simply developing our pieces. And we're going to try to play against black's bad piece. And that piece, hopefully you can see black's bad piece, is the bishop on c8. Often in the Caro-Kann, in this type of structure, this bishop would already be outside the pawn structure. When I say the pawn structure, if you have a look at the pawns on f7, e6, c6 and b7, the bishop at the moment is trapped behind these pawns. In the Caro-Kann, normally, the bishop will be on the other side of these pawns. For example, on the f5 square, where it would be much better positioned. So one of the advantages of the hillbilly, in a number of variations, you keep black's light square bishop trapped behind the pawns, as in this variation. And I think white has a slight advantage here. But let's go back now and just have a look at black's main option after queen h5. And that's not the move e6, it's the move g6. So where do you put the queen? You should already know where you put the queen now, going from the hint I gave you earlier. Queen to h4. And now, I've played this, I would say, probably 100 times on the internet with great results. I also played it in a very critical game in Bunratty, which is a tournament in Ireland. And this was for the playoff, for the title. And I played it in a 10-minute game against Jonathan Spielman, who was once one of the top 6 players in the world. He was a very strong English grandmaster, and I defeated him very quickly with this idea. So it's not just a tricky short-term idea. It does have a lot. You can play against the best players in the world, and I think I've proven that by beating a number of top grandmasters with it. But you could still be thinking, what's the idea? Well, you are a pawn down. Let's say black defends the pawn with knight to f6. We develop and attack the pawn with knight to c3. We have now 2 pieces attacking the pawn on e4. Let's say black defends it again. And here we have another key point behind the hillbilly. And that is the move f3, making this a proper sacrifice. And this is really, I guess, the real point behind the opening. Now, in actual fact, Spielman, when I played him, pushed on with e3 here, returning the pawn immediately. But this was clearly a mistake, as I got a very good position after simply capturing the pawn back. And after knight bd7, well, he played, but this is a blunder because I now just played e4. And I gained, well, you can already see a very good position. The bishop has to go to e6, and we simply double his pawns with a very, very nice structure. So e3 is certainly not the best way to play against f3. And if black wants to try to keep any kind of, I wouldn't say an advantage, but he wants to try to keep in the game even here, he has to accept the pawn. He has to take on f3. And now we recapture with our knight. And I would say this is one of the starting points of the mainline hillbilly attack. Now, what does white have in compensation for his pawn disadvantage? Well, he has a very active queen on h4, and often this should be combined with the attacking plan. This is a key thing to remember now of d4, bishop to h6, and knight to g5. Try to remember all those quick developing attacking moves. Very, very good ideas. Get those pieces into the game. So that's one key attacking idea. Another idea, your hillbilly bishop on b3 attacks f7, a weak point. So you can often go for knight e5, knight to g5 immediately, going for the square. And really, the simplest way to play this position for white is just go d4, castles kingside, bishop to h6, knight to g5, and attack, attack, attack. You have the open f-file for your rook. You have plenty of compensation. And I think this is a very, very promising position for white already. And in the majority of cases I found, black, you will reach this position in your games. Black will play precisely down this line. Now, let me just show you some possible ways this position could continue. Well, bishop to g7 looks entirely natural. And now we continue with our plan, d4. So now our bishop on c1 can enter the game. Every other white piece is doing a great job. And one of the great things I like about the hillbilly is the queen on h4. Now, one thing you may notice is similarity between this opening and the black Mardima gambit. If you know the black Mardima gambits, at the end of this video I might take you through that very quickly, but this is basically, in my opinion, an improved version for white of the black Mardima gambit, which is basically the same structure to this, but black has a knight on c6 and not a pawn on c6, which is very beneficial to black because black then has extra pressure against d4. But now black still has to think how he's going to continue his development. And it takes a long time for him to get his king anywhere safe. If he does castle kingside, you have this ready-made attack. For example, let's say after the move d4, black does castle kingside, which happens in a lot of games. Now we continue with our plan. Can you remember our plan here? Bishop h6, that is the correct way to play. And then you want to continue with knight to g5, castles kingside. You can even castle queenside if you like, and attack, attack, attack. For example, let's say black continues with knight bd7, simple developing move. And now knight to g5, and already the threats are looming around the black king. If you can get rid of the knight on f6, then there may even be a checkmate idea on h7. For example, just imagine the knight on f6 wasn't there. Just imagine it was not on that square. Well, then white could play bishop takes g7 and queen takes h7 checkmate in a number of positions. So this is one thing you've got to bear in mind. But combine this with the bishop attacking, pressure on f7, a rook coming to the f-file, very good attacking position. One game I had on the internet continued, a5. And now I simply castled kingside here, bringing another piece into the attack, the rook on f1. Now my opponent continued b5, and his idea is clear. He wants to go a4, and this move would trap my bishop. But there is now a nice tactic here. I might just give you a couple of seconds to see if you can spot the tactic. It's not actually surprising there is a tactic in this position because white has so many pieces attacking. How many pieces does white have attacking? The bishop on b3, 1. Bishop on h6, 2. Knight on g5, 3. Queen on h4, 4. Rook on f1, 5 pieces attacking. Can you spot the tactic here? Well, the tactic is bishop takes g7, king takes g7, forced, and now bishop takes f7. A rather devastating tactic, actually. And the point is, after rook takes f7, you can now go rook takes f5. And the knight has the e6 square, and this will lead to checkmate. So this really just demonstrates one of the dangers with black's position. Now, I think I'm going to run through that one more time with you, because obviously it's the first time you've seen this opening. And let's just go all the way back to the start so we can try to reinforce some of those ideas in your head. And then we'll have a quick look at what happens if black refuses to accept the sacrifice of the pawn on e4. So e4, c6, the Caro-Kann. And remember, you can only play this particular sacrificial line, the hillbilly attack, against the Caro-Kann opening. In the following videos, which I hope you'll be interested in watching, there'll be 3 in this series. Hot, spicy attacks with Simon Williams with e4. I'll be showing ways you can play against the Sicilian in a hot and spicy way, and against the French defense. But this is only for the Caro-Kann, and that is with bishop to c4, d5, which I'm sure nearly everyone will play with black, and now bishop to b3. Now, taking the pawn is critical. Remember what white plays here. You have to play aggressively. You want to get your queen to an aggressive square, queen to h5. The most logical response here is, of course, pawn to g6, attacking the queen and stopping a checkmate. And now the queen comes to this aggressive h4 square. And later on, we see how this is a very good square because the pawn on g6 is a slight weakness of black, and white may be able to continue with bishop to h6 at some point, taking advantage of this factor. Now, if black tries to hold on to his e4 pawn, our plan's the same. Basically, our next plan now is to go knight c3 in f3. So let's see that in action. Knight to f6, knight to c3, bishop to f5, and now another key move in the hillbilly, pawn to f3, opening up more lines. E takes f3, and now knight takes f3, getting our hillbilly position, bishop g7, and now d4. Now, there are other moves here you can consider playing, but if you want to look at that, looking at the notes, there is a PGN also provided with this game where you can see more in-depth notes. There's only so much I can cram into a video without getting completely tongue-tied, so you'll have to bear with me there. For more in-depth notes, look at the PGN file. But d4, sensible move, grabbing space in the center. And now, well, we looked at last time what happens if black castles. Then he runs into this ready-made attack. Bishop h6, knight g5. Let's have a look. Instead of castling, what happens if black first plays knight bd7? Now, this maybe makes a bit more sense. If I was black, I would be very afraid of castling because it does look like the king's walking straight into a vicious attack. So this kind of makes a little bit more sense. So how do we continue now? Well, standard fashion. Bishop h6, the standard plan. It's such an easy opening to play. Now, if black takes on h6, you have ideas now, queen g7 even, knight g5, knight e5, all these ideas coming into the game. Let's say he tries e6 here. One variation I analysed here is castles kingside. I kind of like castling kingside rather than queenside in general because it brings a rook to f1, a rook to the game very quickly. And now quite a beautiful variation here I was analysing is something like queen to c7 and now knight to g5. Black was trying to castle queenside, so your knight comes to attack f7 straight away. And something along the lines of knight to g4, it makes sense to kick this queen away maybe. Queen to h4, be careful, black was threatening his own attack there, so you've got to keep defending this pawn. And now I had another game on the internet which continued h6 here, very logical. But there is a crushing tactic here. Can you see that tactic? I'll give you another chance here. When you're playing the hillbilly, you have to play aggressively. And the tactic here, try not to go backwards in the hillbilly. Remember, you're this gun, you're this gun blasting, crazy hillbilly. You're not playing with too much elegance. You're playing with pure aggression. So that's what you need to play when you play this opening. Don't play with elegance, just go for the king. Checkmate is the end of the game after all. Well, the tactic is knight takes f7, and if king takes f7, simply queen takes g4. And now we have a lovely position here. Actually, the game I had continued king g7, and I found a very nice queen sacrifice here. I'll just show you because it's quite entertaining. Bishop takes e6, leaving the queen on pre. But after black takes the queen, our rook comes to s7 with this yo-yo effect we're going to see. King g8, rook takes d7 check. And I took on c7. I'm pawn up with a very active rook and a winning position. So I went on to win the game quite easily here. Okay, so very quickly now, that's the main things to go through in the Decepted Hillbilly. What happens if after bishop c4, d5, bishop b3, if black does not capture on e4? Well, let's have a quick look. If the one key thing to remember, if he plays a move like e6 or knight to f6, we are going to go for a setup now with e5. And our plan here is to continue with d4, c3, bishop to c2. And try to keep a very good center and bring this bishop, which is now not so good, onto the c2 square where it attacks along this diagonal. For example, c5, now c3. And if knight c6, d4. And this position, I think, is very playable for white, very easy to play for white. You can just play knight to f3, castles, bishop c2. Very similar to a French defense here. Very, very similar to a French defense. But you already have your bishop here. So this is one way that I think is a good way for white to play. Now, instead of e6, what would happen if black goes for knight to f6? Well, that's quite logical as well. But again, I think we continue with the same plan. e5, and after knight d7, simply d4. We want to go c3 and bishop c2 again. For example, e6, c3, and the bishop comes back to c2, and we have this nice space advantage because our pawn on e5. Now, I don't really want to overcomplicate things. It's only a really short and snappy video. There are more information to this in the notes. I mean, I will now quickly go over the key points, and that's with bishop c4 against this Caro-Kann, and after d5, bishop b3. Now, if your opponent takes on e4, very simple. You go queen h5, the queen comes to h4, you develop with knight to c3. I'd say this is stage 1 of your plan. So let's just see that in motion. Knight c3, and then when you have this position, you have to break with f3, and all your pieces should come springing into life with a very promising attacking middle game position here. The bishop coming to h6, castling, the knight coming to g5, and you have great pressure against black's position. Well, I hope you have some luck with Hillbilly. It's brought me lots of luck in the past. It's a great opening. I think you can play it at all levels. Very interesting, very aggressive way to play. And one of the joys about this, I bet you won't find this mentioned in any book. I've never seen it, and I have a large collection of books in my library on chess. And it's an opening that I don't think anyone knows about, this Hillbilly Attack. So it's a rather secret Hillbilly, this one. But anyway, good luck with the Hillbilly. Please tune in to my other spicy gambits with e4 in the other videos, which you can see on chess.com as well.